picture this moment and let it settle deep into your heart like a stone dropping into still water. A 40-year-old man standing behind floor-to-ceiling windows that cost more than most people's homes, 30 stories above the glittering constellation of Manhattan. His reflection merges with the city below, a ghost haunting his own life, a shadow of the man he once dreamed of becoming. His name is Lorian Vance, and by every measure that society values, he is a spectacular success. CEO of Vance Technologies, a company worth $3 billion that he built from nothing but ambition and the willingness to sacrifice everything that makes life worth living. Master of boardrooms where fortunes are made and lost with the stroke of a pen, commander of an empire that stretches across continents and touches millions of lives. But tonight, as his phone buzzes incessantly on the cold Carrara marble counter, each ring a reminder of the world that demands his constant attention, he doesn't move to answer it, because Lorian Vance, a man who controls the fate of thousands with a single decision, cannot control the deafening silence in his own home. Listen carefully. Do you hear that? That's the sound of emptiness echoing through a penthouse that costs more per month than most families earn in a year. That's the sound of wealth without warmth, success without soul, achievement without joy. It's the sound of a man who won every battle except the one that mattered most, the battle for his own son's heart. The apartment around him is a monument to taste and money. Italian marble floors so polished, they mirror your footsteps back at you like accusations. Crystal chandeliers from Prague that cast rainbows on walls hung with original Picassos and Mondrians. Art chosen not for love, but for investment value. Furniture that graces the pages of Architectural Digest, each piece carefully selected to impress visitors who never come and intimidate business associates who measure worth in square footage and price per piece. Everything is perfect. Nothing is home. In another room of this same palatial prison, 7-year-old Milo sits cross-legged on hardwood floors so polished they reflect the loneliness in his dark eyes. He's building towers of dominoes with the methodical precision of a child who's learned that order is safer than chaos, that patterns are more reliable than people, that things you build yourself can't leave you the way people do. Build them up. Line by perfect line. Watch them stand in formation like soldiers waiting for orders, then knock them down with a single touch, watching them fall in a cascade of inevitable destruction that somehow feels like the most honest thing in his world. Over and over, the ritual has become meditation, a way of making sense of a universe where the most important thing in his life, his mother's love, could disappear in an instant, leaving nothing but silence and the careful avoidance of anything that might bring back the pain. The little boy doesn't speak much anymore, hasn't spoken much since the day his world shattered into a million pieces 5 years ago, just like those dominoes falling in an endless, meaningless pattern that mirrors the rhythm of his broken heart. They say money can buy everything, Lorian thinks to himself, watching his reflection blur with unshed tears that he's trained himself never to shed. They lied. Money can't buy back time. It can't purchase forgiveness. It can't restore the sound of your child's laughter or the feeling of being loved for who you are instead of what you've accomplished. And it sure as hell can't fill the hole in your chest where your heart used to be. Tonight, neither father nor son knows that everything is about to change, because tomorrow, a woman named Zara Ellis will knock on their door carrying her own collection of broken pieces, her own catalogue of losses, her own desperate need to transform pain into purpose. A woman who understands that sometimes the only way to heal your own wounds is to prevent the same wounds from destroying someone else. And with her will come the question that will stop a father's heart, shatter every wall he's built, and force him to choose between the empire he created and the son he abandoned. Are they my brothers and sisters? But we're getting ahead of ourselves, aren't we? First, you need to understand how a man becomes so extraordinarily successful at conquering the world, and so utterly catastrophic at loving his own child. You need to see how someone can be surrounded by luxury and drowning in loneliness, how it's possible to have everything and nothing at the same time. Dawn breaks over Vance Technologies like a blade cutting through the darkness of night, and Lorian is already in his corner office on the 42nd floor, surrounded by reports that will determine whether smaller companies live or die in the merciless ecosystem of corporate America. The city wakes up below him in waves, first the early commuters, then the school children, then the millions of ordinary people starting their ordinary days, filled with ordinary joys and sorrows. He's forgotten how to feel, but he's been awake for hours. Sleep, like love, like any form of vulnerability, has become a luxury he can't afford. His mind runs on caffeine and adrenaline, and the constant pressure of staying 3 steps ahead of competitors who would destroy him if they sensed even a moment of weakness. The office itself is a temple to his success. Walls lined with awards from business journals, photographs of him shaking hands with presidents and prime ministers, framed articles with headlines like "The Vance Empire," "How One Man Revolutionized Tech Investment," and "Billionaire Before 40, the Lorian Vance Story." Every surface gleams with the kind of expensive simplicity that screams wealth to those who understand the language. At exactly 9 a.m., he calls a meeting that will determine the fate of 500 employees, 500 families, 500 lives that will be reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet, problems to be solved with the surgical precision of a man who's learned to cut away anything that threatens efficiency. He enters the boardroom like a general preparing for battle, his handmade Italian shoes silent on carpet that costs more per square foot than most people's rent. 12 men in $1,000 suits rise as he takes his seat at the head of a mahogany table, harvested from trees older than the country itself. These are the wolves of Wall Street, men who've learned to devour weakness and call it business, who measure their worth in quarterly reports and stock prices. "Gentlemen," Lorian's voice cuts through the morning air like polished steel wrapped in silk. "Department 7 requires restructuring. Market analysis indicates we're carrying 60% redundancy in that division. Efficiency demands sacrifice, and sentiment has no place in fiscal responsibility." Nods around the table like a church congregation responding to familiar liturgy. No one questions the human cost because these aren't people they're discussing. They're assets, line items, variables in an equation that must balance regardless of the real-world consequences. "What about severance packages?" asks Henderson, the CFO, though his tone suggests he already knows the answer and is asking only for the sake of legal documentation. "Standard minimum as required by federal law. We're not running a charity, gentlemen. Every dollar we spend on sentiment is a dollar stolen from our shareholders, from growth, from the future we're building." The words come easily because he's said them so many times they've worn grooves in his conscience. Efficiency, responsibility, growth, the holy trinity of corporate success that justifies any sacrifice except the ones that actually matter. But then, buzz. His phone lights up on the mahogany surface, an intrusion of the personal into the professional realm he's spent decades perfecting. A text from Mrs. Henderson, Milo's current nanny. "Mr. Vance, I'm worried." Milo refused to eat again. 3rd day. In a row. He just sits there, staring at his food like it's going to disappear. He won't talk to me about what's wrong. I think he needs to see someone. A counselor, maybe, or better yet, he needs his father. Lorian glances at the message for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds to absorb the information that his 7-year-old son is slowly starving himself. 3 seconds to feel his heart constrict with a pain he's become expert at compartmentalizing and ignoring. 3 seconds to remember that he has responsibilities beyond these boardrooms, beyond these profit margins, beyond the empire he's built on the foundation of everything he's lost. Then he slides the phone face down and continues his presentation, as if nothing happened, as if his child's pain is just another distraction to be managed and contained. Moving on to the quarterly projections for the Asia-Pacific division, the irony cuts deeper than any blade could penetrate. Here's a man who can decide the livelihood of hundreds with the casual indifference of someone choosing what to wear in the morning. A man who commands respect, fear, and admiration in equal measure from titans of industry. A man whose decisions ripple through global markets and affect the lives of millions. Yet he can't coax his own son to eat a single meal. Mrs. Henderson has been the 4th nanny this year, the latest in a string of well-meaning women who think they can fix what's broken in the Vance household with patience and professional competence. They all leave eventually, These caregivers who arrive with optimism and depart with something that looks suspiciously like heartbreak. They all say the same thing on their way out, variations on a theme that Lorien has learned to tune out like background noise. The boy needs his father, not another supervisor. He needs love, not management. He needs someone who sees him as a person instead of a project. He needs connection, Mr. Vance. He needs to matter to someone in ways that have nothing to do with his behavior or his academic performance. But Lorien doesn't know how to be a father in the way they mean. He only knows how to be successful, and success, as he learned long ago in the brutal arithmetic of his own upbringing, requires distance, it requires walls. It requires the ability to make hard choices without letting emotions cloud your judgment or weaken your resolve. Love is a liability in a world that rewards strength. Attachment is weakness in a system that demands constant adaptation. These are the laws that built his empire, the principles that transformed him from a poor kid from Detroit into a billionaire before his 40th birthday. These are also the laws that are slowly killing his son. 5 years ago, on a rain-soaked evening in October when the leaves were turning and the air carried the promise of winter, Lorien's carefully constructed world ended in twisted metal and shattered glass on a street corner 6 blocks from there. Home Elizabeth Marie Vance, his wife, his anchor, his conscience, his heart walking around outside his body, died in a car accident while driving away from their house. Away from him. Away from the terrible fight they'd had that night, the kind of fight that leaves scars on souls and echoes in empty rooms for years after the voices have gone silent. The fight that would replay in his mind every single day for the next 5 years like a broken record of regret and self-recrimination. They had been standing in the very kitchen where Milo now eats his silent meals, the marble island between them like a battlefield dividing 2 armies that had once been lovers. 2-year-old Milo was upstairs in his crib, hopefully asleep, hopefully not absorbing the toxic energy of parents destroying each other with words that cut deeper than any physical weapon ever could. "You're becoming a stranger to your own family," Elizabeth had shouted through tears that mixed rage and heartbreak in equal measure, her voice cracking with the strain of loving someone who seemed determined to become unlovable. "When was the last time you held your son? When was the last time you asked him about his day, about his dreams, about what makes him laugh or what scares him in the dark?" Her hair was coming loose from the ponytail she'd worn to the charity fundraiser they'd just returned from, an event where she'd spent 3 hours watching him work the room like a man running for office, networking and deal-making, while she made small talk with wives who probably wondered why she looked so sad when she had everything money could buy. "When was the last time you looked at me and saw your wife instead of just another item on your schedule?" she continued, her voice breaking completely now. "When was the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about your meetings or your deals or your plans for expanding the company into new markets?" They were standing in the kitchen, where they'd once danced while dinner cooked, where they'd shared midnight snacks and whispered dreams and planned the future that felt as solid and permanent as the marble countertops surrounding them. "I'm building a future for him," Lorien had replied, his voice carrying the cold certainty that allows no room for doubt or compromise. Someone has to be responsible for more than just the present moment. Someone has to think beyond today, beyond right now, beyond what feels good in the moment. This company, this wealth, this security, it's his inheritance. It's his protection against a world that doesn't care about good intentions or loving hearts. Protection? Elizabeth's voice had risen to a pitch that made him wince. "You call this protection? You're building a fortress, Lorien, but you're locking all of us outside it. You're so busy securing our future that you're destroying our present." She moved toward the door, her keys already in her trembling hand, her coat thrown over her arm like armor she was putting on for battle. "I can't do this anymore," she said, and the finality in her voice should have warned him, should have made him drop everything and fight for her, should have triggered every alarm in his heart. "I can't watch you disappear into your own ambition. I can't pretend that success is more important than love. And I won't let you teach our son that money matters more than moments, that achievement is more valuable than attention." "Where are you going?" he asked, but even as the words left his mouth, he was already planning how to use the time alone to catch up on the quarterly reports waiting in his study. to my sister's house, to think, to figure out if there's anything left of the man I married under all that armor you've built around yourself." She paused at the door, her hand on the brass handle that he'd insisted they upgrade because the original wasn't impressive enough for a man of his stature. "I fell in love with someone who dreamed of making a difference in the world. Someone who talked about using success to create something meaningful. Somewhere along the way you became someone who just wants to accumulate more success for its own sake." Those were the last words they ever exchanged. An hour later, a drunk driver ran a red light on Fifth Avenue, and Elizabeth was gone. Gone with all her reproaches, all her love, all her desperate attempts to save a family that was already drowning in the pursuit of everything except what mattered. The call came at 11:47 p.m. Lorian was still in his study, still working, still proving her wrong by being exactly the man she'd accused him of becoming. "Mr. Vance, this is Dr. Martinez at Presbyterian Hospital. I'm calling about your wife, Elizabeth. There's been an accident." The rest of the conversation exists in his memory as fragments, pieces of a broken mirror that reflect horror from every angle. "Massive trauma. Did everything we could. So sorry for your loss. Would you like us to call someone?" At the funeral, held in the Episcopal Church where they'd been married 6 years earlier, under stained glass windows that painted rainbow patterns on Elizabeth's white dress, Lorian held his son for exactly 4 minutes and 27 seconds. He counted because counting made it feel less like his heart was being torn from his chest and fed to the wolves of grief that had taken up residence in his soul. 4 minutes and 27 seconds of holding a 2-year-old who kept looking around and asking, "Mama, Mama," in the heartbreaking way that children do when the world stops making sense and the people they depend on can't explain why. After that day, Lorian threw himself into work with the desperation of a drowning man clinging to driftwood. Vance Technologies doubled in size within 6 months, then tripled. The money poured in like a flood, washing away everything else, including the sound of his son calling for him in the night, including the memory of what it felt like to love someone more than you loved success. The penthouse became a museum of avoidance, a mausoleum where love had once lived. Family photos disappeared into storage units, like evidence of a crime he'd rather forget. Elizabeth's clothes, her books, her favorite coffee mug with the chip on the handle that she'd refused to throw away, everything that might remind him of what he'd lost went into boxes that he paid other people to deal with. Laughter became an extinct sound in those marble halls, as rare and precious as some endangered species that exists only in the memories of those old enough to remember. When the world was different and little Milo learned that love was something that lived only in bedtime stories, about mothers who went to heaven and fathers who had more important things to do than tuck you in or answer your questions about why the sky is blue or whether dogs dream about chasing cats. Mrs. Henderson quit on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 5 years to the day after Elizabeth's funeral, with the kind of finality that leaves no room for negotiation or counter-offers. "I can't watch that child wither away like a plant nobody remembers to water," she told Lorian, her voice heavy with 40 years of experience raising other people's children and the accumulated wisdom that comes from seeing what love can do and what its absence destroys. "He needs more than supervision, Mr. Vance. He needs more than someone to make sure he eats his vegetables and does his homework and gets to school on time." She stood in the marble foyer where Elizabeth had once arranged fresh flowers every week, her sensible shoes planted firmly on floors that now reflected nothing but emptiness. "He needs love, not just maintenance. He needs a father, not just a provider. He needs someone who sees him as a miracle instead of a responsibility." She paused, studying his face with the kind of direct attention that made him want to retreat to his study and close the door on anything that felt like judgment. "I've been a nanny for most of my adult life, Mr. Vance. I've worked for senators and movie stars and people who think their money makes them important. But I've never seen a child so hungry for affection that he started to believe he doesn't deserve it." She gathered her purse and the small bag of personal items she'd kept in Milo's room, a picture of her own grandchildren, a book of poetry that she sometimes read aloud when Milo couldn't sleep, a small cross that had belonged to her mother. "You're killing him with kindness," she said, her hand on the brass door handle. "All this luxury, all this protection from the world, all these advantages that money can buy, you're suffocating his spirit with them. Children need more than safety, Mr. Vance. They need connection. They need to matter to someone in ways that have nothing to do with their behavior or their achievements." The door closed behind her with a soft click that somehow sounded like judgment. By Thursday morning, the fifth nanny in 8 months stands outside the imposing double doors of the Vance penthouse, clutching a manila folder containing her resume, references, and the desperate hope that this job might be the answer to prayers she's been whispering for 3 years. Her name is Zara Ellis, and she's 36 years old with kind eyes that have seen too much sorrow and strong hands that have saved too many lives to count. She wears a navy dress that's professional but warm, and she carries herself with the quiet confidence of someone who's learned that true strength comes not from avoiding pain, but from transforming it into purpose. She takes a deep breath, studying. The building that rises above her like a monument to wealth and isolation. 43 floors of glass and steel reaching toward heaven, each window reflecting the gray October sky, like tears that refuse to fall. The address alone tells a story of success that most people can only dream of, but Zara has learned to read between the lines of luxury, to see the emptiness that often hides behind expensive facades. 3 years ago, Zara Ellis was the head pediatric nurse at St. Mary's Children's Hospital, the person they called when hope was running out and medical textbooks offered no more answers. She was the one who worked 18-hour shifts because going home meant facing the silence of her own apartment, her own collection of losses, her own catalogue of children she couldn't save. She was the one who brought babies back from the edge of death with a combination of medical expertise and fierce protective love that seemed to flow from some inexhaustible well deep inside her soul. Doctors relied on her judgment. Parents trusted her with their most precious treasures. Children smiled when they saw her coming because they knew she was someone who would fight for them with everything she had. But even the most skilled hands can't save everyone. Even the most loving heart can't heal every wound. Even the most dedicated professional can't prevent every tragedy that walks through hospital doors in the arms of parents who've already started to grieve. The memory visits her in dreams and quiet moments, replaying with the persistent clarity of trauma that refuses to fade. Tommy Martinez, age 4, pulled from a neighbor's pool blue and still as Winterstone. She worked on him for 47 minutes, refusing to give up even when the doctors shook their heads and whispered about brain damage and vegetative states and the mercy of letting go. Her hands moved with mechanical precision, while her heart shattered with each compression, each breath she forced into lungs that had forgotten how to want air. "Come on, baby," she whispered as she worked, sweat beading on her forehead despite the air conditioning that kept the trauma bay at a constant 68 degrees. "Come back to us. Your mama's waiting in the hall. Your daddy's praying in the chapel. Your sister drew you a picture. Come back," and miracle of miracles, he did. That small chest rose with the most beautiful breath Zara had ever witnessed, and Tommy Martinez lived to go home and learn to walk again and tell knock-knock jokes that made no sense but filled his mother's heart with more joy than all the logic in the world. But it was too late for her own little brothers, Michael and David Ellis, who had drowned in Lake George on a perfect summer day when Zara was 17 and thought she was old enough, responsible enough, mature enough to keep them safe while their parents drove to town for groceries. Some wounds, she tells herself as she presses the doorbell, its chime echoing through marble hallways she can't yet imagine, can only be healed by preventing the same wound in another soul. When Lorian opens the door, he sees a composed woman with skin the color of warm honey and eyes that hold depths he can't immediately fathom. Professional but approachable, confident but not arrogant, carrying herself with the kind of grace that suggests she's comfortable in her own skin despite whatever storms she's weathered. He doesn't see the pain that mirrors his own. He doesn't recognize the grief that's carved hollows in her heart that match the emptiness in his own chest. He doesn't understand that sometimes the universe conspires to place broken people exactly where they need to be to heal each other. "Mr. Vance? I'm Zara Ellis. I'm here about the nanny position." Her voice is steady, confident. tinged with an accent that speaks of southern roots and family dinners and the kind of love that wraps around you like a warm blanket on a cold night. It's the voice of someone who's learned to find strength in softness, power in compassion, healing in the simple act of showing up for people who need someone to care. What Lorian doesn't know, what he can't possibly understand yet, is that Zara isn't just looking for a job. She's looking for redemption. She's looking for a way to transform her guilt into grace, her loss into love, her pain into the kind of purpose that makes suffering meaningful. "Please," Lorian says, stepping aside to let her enter his beautiful empty castle. "Come in." As the door closes behind her with a whisper of expensive hinges, neither of them knows that this moment, this simple invitation across a threshold, will change everything. Neither of them knows that in this house of marble and silence, a 7-year-old boy is about to ask a question that will shatter every wall his father has built and force them all to discover what family really means when it's built on choice instead of obligation, on presence instead of possession, on love instead of fear. The transformation is about to begin, but first, there will be breaking. There will be pain. There will be the kind of honest reckoning that comes only when people finally stop running from their own hearts and start listening to what love has been trying to tell them all along. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, the breaking is exactly what we need to let the light in. Zara's first week in the Vance household is like learning to navigate a beautiful frozen wasteland where every surface gleams with the kind of perfection that money can buy, but warmth cannot penetrate. The penthouse is a masterpiece of interior design. Floors of Italian Carrara marble that cost more per square foot than most people's annual salaries, crystal chandeliers from Czech artisans whose families have been creating light for centuries, walls adorned with original masterpieces that hang in climate-controlled splendor. Everything has been chosen for its ability to impress rather than comfort, to intimidate rather than welcome. The furniture looks like it belongs in a museum, beautiful, untouchable, designed to be admired from a respectful distance rather than lived in, sat on, spilled on, loved into the comfortable wornness that marks a real home. But it's the silence that strikes Zara most profoundly, settling into her bones like a chill that no amount of heated marble floors can chase away. This isn't the comfortable quiet of a peaceful home where love moves in whispers and contentment doesn't need words. This is the oppressive silence of a mausoleum where every sound echoes with emptiness and every room feels like a monument to grief that no one dares acknowledge. She finds herself walking softly, speaking in hushed tones, existing carefully in spaces that feel too perfect for human habitation. There are no fingerprints on the floor-to-ceiling windows that offer breathtaking views of Central Park. No drawings stuck to the restaurant-grade refrigerator with colorful magnets. No laughter echoing through halls that could accommodate a small orchestra. No toys scattered in casual abandon across floors that reflect your image back like accusations. The playroom, an entire room devoted to childhood, looks like a showroom display. Every toy in its designated place. Every game stacked with mathematical precision. Every surface gleaming as if it's never been touched by small hands, sticky with the residue of actual play. It's the saddest room Zara has ever encountered, because it represents everything money can provide, and nothing that childhood actually needs. And then there's Milo. Sweet, heartbreaking, impossibly careful Milo, who moves through his days like a small ghost haunting his own life. At 7 years old, he possesses the kind of self-control that would be impressive in an adult and devastating in a child. He eats what he's given without complaint, though Zara notices he rarely finishes his meals. He follows instructions without question, completes his homework with mechanical precision, and goes to bed when he's told with the resigned acceptance of someone much older than his years. But he doesn't play. Not really, not with the wild abandon that children should bring to the simple act of being alive. Instead, he exists in careful, controlled patterns that speak of a child who's learned that big emotions are dangerous, that need is weakness, that the safest way to live is to require as little as possible from the adults who are supposed to love you. He builds elaborate structures with his expensive building blocks, always in perfect geometric lines, never allowing for the beautiful, chaos that marks authentic childhood creativity. He colors inside the lines with mechanical precision, as if staying within boundaries might somehow protect him from the kind of loss that comes when you love too much, need too openly, trust too completely. When he speaks, and he speaks rarely, his words are careful, considered, designed not to disturb the fragile peace of his father's world. He's learned to be a convenient child, an easy child, a child who makes himself as small and unnoticeable as possible because love, in his experience, is conditional on being no trouble at all. Zara recognizes the signs immediately. This isn't just shyness or natural introversion. This is a child who's learned to survive by making himself invisible, who's internalized the devastating message that his needs, his feelings, his very existence are somehow too much for the people who are supposed to love him unconditionally. She's seen it before in the pediatric ward. Children who've learned to be perfectly behaved patients because they've absorbed the unconscious message that sick children who make demands are burdens, that love must be earned through compliance, that safety comes from never asking for more than the absolute minimum. On her third night, Zara discovers something that stops her cold and brings back memories she spent years trying to heal, memories that visit her in dreams and quiet moments when her professional defenses are down. She's checking on Milo before bed, a ritual she's instituted despite his polite protests that he doesn't need to be tucked in, that he's perfectly capable of managing his own bedtime routine. She's learned to read between the lines of his careful independence, to see the longing he hides behind self-sufficiency. The house is settling into its nightly quiet, the kind of expensive silence that comes from perfect insulation and the absence of the normal sounds of family life. Lorian is in his study, door closed, working on something that can't wait until morning, because nothing in his world ever can. The housekeeper has gone home to her own family, leaving behind the kind of sterile cleanliness that erases all evidence of human habitation. As Zara approaches Milo's room, she notices a soft light coming from under his door, not the warm glow of a reading lamp, but the harsh fluorescence of the bathroom light. She can hear small, deliberate sounds that make her nursing instincts prickle with alarm. She knocks softly, then opens the door when there's no response. What she sees will haunt her for the rest of her life. Milo is sitting on his bed, still dressed in his school uniform, holding a paperclip he's straightened into a small, sharp point. As Zara watches in horror, he presses it deliberately into the soft skin of his forearm, his face expressionless except for the single tear that tracks down his cheek like a pearl of pure grief. "Milo, honey, what are you doing?" she asks gently, fighting to keep the alarm and heartbreak out of her voice. She approaches slowly, the way you might approach a wounded animal, afraid that sudden movement might cause him to flee or hurt himself more severely. The little boy looks up with those impossibly sad eyes, eyes that have seen too much loss and felt too much abandonment for someone who should still believe in fairy tales and happy endings. For a moment, they stare at each other across a distance that feels measured in miles rather than feet. "If I get hurt," he explains with the matter-of-fact logic that children use to make sense of an incomprehensible world, "maybe Mommy will come back to take care of me. Like she used to when I had Owies." His voice is matter-of-fact, as if he's explaining something perfectly reasonable, something any adult should understand. She always made the hurt go away. She had special kisses that were better than Band-Aids. She said mommies have magic in their kisses. Zara's breath catches in her throat, and she has to grip the doorframe to keep from falling to her knees. She recognizes this behavior from her years in pediatrics. She's seen it in children who've experienced profound trauma, who've learned that pain is the only reliable way to receive care and attention. It's not attention-seeking in the way adults often dismiss it. It's not manipulation or drama. It's desperation. It's a child's broken logic trying to create some connection between physical pain and emotional care, trying to find some way to summon the love that disappeared from his world. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispers, moving slowly to sit on the edge of his bed. "Your mommy can't come back. She's in heaven, remember? But she would want someone to take care of you when you're hurt. Will you let me do that?" For the first time since she arrived, Milo really looks at her, really sees her. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he nods and hands her the paperclip. Zara tends to his small wounds with hands that shake with more than just the tremors of controlled emotion. She cleans each tiny puncture with antiseptic that stings less than the pain in her heart, applies tiny bandages with the kind of gentle precision that comes from years of caring for broken things. As she works, she tells him about her own brothers, about Michael and David who are in heaven too, about how sometimes missing people hurt so much, it feels like we need the hurt to be on the outside too, where we can see it and touch it and maybe understand it better. But there are better ways to remember people we love, she whispers, as she smooths the last bandage into place. Ways that would make them happy instead of sad if they could see us. Your mommy loved you so much, Milo. She wouldn't want you to hurt yourself because you miss her. She would want you to find ways to feel close to her that bring joy instead of pain. That night, Zara calls the pediatric crisis hotline for guidance, speaking in hushed tones in her small guest room while Milo sleeps down the hall. The crisis. Counselor confirms what she already knows. This is a child in profound emotional distress, exhibiting signs of complicated grief and attachment trauma that require immediate attention. She doesn't call Lorian. He's in Hong Kong on business, negotiating a deal that will add another 100 million to his net worth, while his son slowly carves grief into his own skin. Even if he were home, she suspects the conversation would go nowhere. How do you tell a man that his success is killing his child? How do you explain that all the security and luxury in the world can't substitute for presence, for attention, for the simple act of being loved unconditionally? Instead, she begins researching childhood trauma specialists, play therapists, anyone who might help her understand how to reach a little boy who's learned that love is something that leaves, that need is dangerous, that the safest way to exist is to require nothing from anyone. The breakthrough comes 2 weeks later, on a rainy Thursday afternoon, when the Manhattan sky is the color of old pewter, and the penthouse feels more like a beautiful prison than ever. Rain streaks down the floor-to-ceiling windows like tears. The building is crying for all the sorrow it contains, and the normally spectacular view of Central Park is obscured by clouds that hang low and heavy with the promise of storms. Zara has been reading everything she can find about childhood trauma and attachment disorders, staying up late into the night, studying articles about play therapy and how children often express what they can't say through games and imagination. She's learned that for kids like Milo, healing happens not through talking. Talking requires trust, and trust requires the belief that the person listening will stay, but through playing out the stories their hearts are too wounded to speak. Allowed children, she's discovered, are natural storytellers. They use play to process experiences that are too big, too complicated, too painful for their developing minds to handle directly. In the safety of pretend, they can explore emotions that feel too dangerous in real life. They can experiment with different endings to stories that in reality ended only in loss. Milo is sitting at the kitchen island, pushing his lunch around his plate without actually eating any of it, a pattern Zara has noticed with growing concern. He'll take a bite, chew mechanically, then seem to forget to swallow, as if eating requires more energy than he possesses. His small body is already showing signs of weight loss that worry her, the kind of gradual wasting that happens when children decide that feeling nothing is better than feeling everything. "Milo," she says gently, settling onto the stool beside him, "would you like to play a game with me?" He looks up with mild interest, the first spark of anything resembling engagement she's seen from him all week. Rain patters against the windows behind them, creating a soundtrack of isolation that somehow makes the vast kitchen feel smaller, more intimate. What kind of game? It's called family. We pretend to be a family and do family things together. Milo considers this with the kind of intense seriousness that children bring to important decisions, his small face scrunched in concentration. The concept seems both foreign and fascinating to him, like she's suggested they play astronauts or pirates, something exciting but completely outside his realm of experience. "What's that like?" he asks finally. "Playing family?" The question breaks Zara's heart all over again, because here's a 7-year-old who doesn't know what playing family looks like. He's lived his entire conscious life in a household where family means careful coexistence, where love is expressed through expensive gifts rather than presents, where the most important relationships are managed like business transactions. Well, she says carefully, we can be whoever we want to be, and we do things that families do, like eat meals together and talk about our days and take care of each other when someone's sad or scared or happy. Milo's eyes light up with something. That might be hope, a spark of curiosity that transforms his entire face. He slides down from his stool and runs to his room, returning with his most treasured possession, a worn brown teddy bear named Bruno that's clearly seen better days. The bear is missing one eye, and his fur has been loved into the kind of softness that comes from years of being held during nightmares and whispered to during lonely afternoons. He's been sewn and resewn so many times that he looks like a patchwork quilt, but he's obviously treasured in the way that only a child can treasure something that represents safety in an unsafe world. I'll be the little boy, Milo announces, with the kind of decisive authority that children use when they're finally allowed to have some control over their world. Bruno can be the daddy, and you. He pauses, studying her face with an intensity that makes her breath catch. You can be the mommy. The word hangs in the air between them, heavy with longing and loss and the kind of hope that feels too fragile to touch. Zara understands the trust he's placing in her by assigning her this role, the vulnerability he's showing by admitting he wants someone to play mother to his imaginary family. They set up a pretend dinner using plastic plates from his elaborate toy kitchen, a kitchen that Zara has noticed looks like it's barely been used despite being stocked with every imaginable toy food and appliance. The irony isn't lost on her that a child surrounded by luxury rarely has access to the simple pleasure of pretend play, and then something magical happens, something that breaks Zara's heart and fills it with hope at the same time. Milo begins to chatter. Really chatter the way children are supposed to when they feel safe enough to let their thoughts tumble out without editing, without fear of judgment or rejection. He sets the table with careful precision, assigns everyone their seats, and begins orchestrating the kind of family dinner he's apparently dreamed about but never experienced. "How was your day, Daddy?" Milo asks Bruno the bear, his voice taking on the eager, hopeful tone of a child who finally has permission to need things, to want things, to imagine that his questions might actually matter to someone. Then, changing his voice to sound deeper and more authoritative, he answers for Bruno. "It was wonderful, son. I got to spend the whole day thinking about you and how much I love you. How was your day? Did you learn anything interesting at school today?" "Yes." Milo's whole face lights up with the kind of enthusiasm that children reserve for sharing discoveries. And with people they trust. We learned about families of animals. Did you know baby elephants stay with their mums for 16 years? 16 whole years! "That's a very long time," Bruno Daddy responds in Milo's approximation of a father's voice. "They must really love each other very much." "Yeah," Milo agrees, his small face growing thoughtful in the way that children's faces do when they're processing something important. "The teacher said elephant families never leave each other behind. They always stay together, even when it's hard, even when there are storms or droughts or scary things. The whole family protects each other." Zara watches this heartbreaking performance, tears threatening to spill over as she witnesses this little boy creating the family conversations he's been starving for. He's playing both parts, the loving father and the needy child, because he knows both roles so intimately, despite never having experienced the real thing. The game continues, and Milo orchestrates elaborate scenarios. Bruno Daddy asking about homework and dreams and fears, Zara Mommy reading bedtime stories and giving hugs that heal everything. Family members taking care of each other when someone gets sick or sad or scared. But then the game takes a turn that stops Zara's breath entirely and forces her to confront the depth of this child's abandonment. Milo pauses in his cheerful chatter, his small face growing serious as he looks directly at Bruno the bear. The shift in mood is palpable, like clouds moving across the sun. "Bruno, Daddy?" His voice is smaller now, more uncertain. "Yes, son? Why don't you ever hug me in real life?" The question hangs in the air like a physical weight, pressing down on both of them with its devastating honesty. Zara feels her heart break a little more as she watches this 7-year-old confront his own abandonment through a game that was supposed to bring joy. In Bruno's voice, higher and more uncertain now, Milo answers his own devastating question. Because Daddy forgot how to love after Mommy went to heaven, and now he's scared that if he loves too much, it might hurt when people go away again. The wisdom of it, the heartbreaking, impossible wisdom of a child trying to make sense of. Adult pain nearly destroys Zara completely. Here's a 7-year-old who's somehow intuited the exact psychological mechanism that's keeping his father trapped in emotional isolation. But that makes the little boy very lonely, Milo continues, still speaking in Bruno's voice. And sometimes the little boy thinks maybe it's his fault that Daddy doesn't want to love him. Neither of them notices Lorien standing in the doorway, his face white with shock, and something that looks like the beginning of understanding. He's returned early from Hong Kong, jet-lagged and irritated about a deal that fell through when the Chinese investors decided his company was too aggressive for their long-term strategy. He came home expecting the usual quiet, the familiar silence that's become the soundtrack of his life, the sterile peace of a house where emotions are managed like any other inconvenience. Instead, he's discovered this scene that hits him like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the air from his lungs and the defenses from his heart. His son, his lonely, neglected, desperately needy son, is playing family with a teddy bear, and the nanny creating the conversations that Lorien should be having with him. Having them, in fact, with more emotional intelligence and intuitive understanding than Lorien has shown in 5 years of actual fatherhood. Worse, the child understands exactly why his father is absent. Not just physically, but emotionally. Milo has diagnosed the problem with the clarity that only children possess when they're forced to become psychologists for their own survival. Daddy forgot how to love because love hurts too much when it goes away. When Milo spots his father in the doorway, the transformation is immediate and heartbreaking. The chattering stops. The enthusiasm drains from his face like color bleeding from a photograph. He quickly hides Bruno behind his back, embarrassed to be caught playing. Embarrassed to be caught needing things that his father has made clear are not available. Not safe, not part of the careful emotional economy of their household. "Ms. Ellis," Lorien says, his voice carrying a coldness that he doesn't feel but can't seem to control. "I need to speak with you, privately." The walk to his study feels like a funeral march, each step echoing through marble hallways that suddenly feel more like a courthouse than a home. Zara follows him with the calm dignity of someone who's faced difficult conversations before, who understands that sometimes the truth creates crisis before it creates healing. Lorien's study is designed to intimidate, a temple to his success that serves as both sanctuary and fortress. The walls are lined with awards and degrees and photographs that document his rise from nobody to somebody, his transformation from a poor kid from Detroit into a man who commands respect and fear in equal measure. The massive mahogany desk dominates, the space like an altar to ambition, and the leather chairs are positioned to make visitors feel small and supplicant. Behind the desk hangs a painting that cost more than most people's houses, not because he loves art, but because owning something priceless sends a message about his own value. But as Zara sits calmly in the chair across from him, she doesn't look intimidated. She looks sorry for him. And somehow that's worse than if she'd been afraid. Pity, he's discovered, cuts deeper than fear ever could. "What exactly are you trying to accomplish with my son?" he demands, pacing behind his desk like a caged animal, his expensive shoes silent on carpet that costs more per square foot than most people's rent. He's still wearing his travel clothes, his usually perfect appearance disheveled from 18 hours of flights and layovers, and the kind of exhaustion that comes from running away from your own life, only to discover that you've brought all your problems with you. "I'm trying to help him heal," Zara replies evenly, her voice carrying the kind of calm that comes from having worked in emergency rooms where panic is a luxury no one can afford. He doesn't need to heal. He needs structure, discipline, education. He needs to understand that the world doesn't revolve around feelings and games and whatever that performance was that I just witnessed. Even as he says the words, Lorien knows they sound hollow, defensive, like the desperate justifications of a man who's built his entire identity on being right about everything except the things that actually matter. Mr. Vance, Zara says gently, but with the kind of firmness that comes from absolute moral certainty. Your son is exhibiting signs of severe emotional neglect. He's engaging in self-harm because he believes physical pain is the only way to receive care and attention. That's not normal behavior for a 7-year-old. The words hit him like physical blows, each one landing with surgical precision on the parts of his heart. He spent 5 years trying to armor against exactly this kind of assault. That's impossible, he says, but his voice lacks conviction. He has everything he needs. The best schools, the best tutors, the best things, Zara interrupts, her voice still gentle but implacable. But things aren't what he needs. Children don't thrive on luxury, Mr. Vance. They thrive on love, on attention, on feeling valued for who they are, not for how well they behave or how little trouble they cause, or how successfully they can pretend they don't need anything from anyone. Don't presume to tell me what my son needs. Then tell me, she challenges, leaning forward slightly, her dark eyes holding his with the kind of direct attention that makes it impossible to look away. When did you last have a conversation with him that wasn't about homework or behavior or some aspect of his performance? When did you last ask him what makes him happy? What scares him? What he dreams about when he's lying in bed at night in this beautiful empty house? The questions hang in the air like accusations, and Lorien realizes with growing horror that he can't answer them. He doesn't know what makes his son happy beyond the generic pleasures that all children supposedly enjoy. He doesn't know what Milo fears beyond the obvious anxieties that any child might have. He doesn't even know what the boy's favorite color is, what kind of music he likes, whether he prefers chocolate or vanilla ice cream. Milo has become a stranger to him, a small person he's responsible for but doesn't understand, doesn't connect with, doesn't really know at all beyond the surface details that nannies report and teachers document and doctors measure during annual checkups. I provide for him, he says finally, and even to his own ears, it sounds like the defense of a man who knows he's already lost the argument. Providing and parenting aren't the same thing, Zara responds, and her voice is sadder now, tinged with the kind of grief that comes from watching preventable tragedies unfold. Your son doesn't need your money, Mr. Vance. He needs your presence. He needs to matter to you in ways that have nothing to do with his behavior or his achievements, or how convenient he is to have around. She pauses, studying his face with the careful attention of someone who's learned to read pain in all its various disguises. When I was working in pediatrics, we saw a lot of kids from wealthy families, kids who had everything money could buy, but were dying inside from emotional starvation. And you know what the common thread was? Parents who confused providing with loving. Parents who thought that keeping their children safe and successful was the same as making them feel valued and cherished. My son is safe. He's successful academically. He's carving pain into his own skin because he thinks it's the only way to get love, Zara says quietly, her words landing like stones in still water, creating ripples that spread outward until they touch every corner of his carefully constructed denial. How safe is that, really? How successful is a child who's so desperate for connection that he's willing to hurt himself to get attention? How well provided for is a little boy who thinks his father's love is conditional on his ability to be invisible? After she leaves, closing the door with a soft click that somehow sounds like judgment, Lorien sits alone in his study, surrounded by all the evidence of his worldly success and forced to confront the spectacular failure of his most important relationship. He stares at the framed photograph on his desk, the last family picture they took before Elizabeth died. In it, 2-year-old Milo is laughing, reaching for his father's face with chubby hands that believe in the reliability of love, in the permanence of presence, in the simple truth that daddies are supposed to catch you when you fall. Lorien is smiling too in that photograph, a genuine smile that crinkles his eyes and transforms his whole face. He looks relaxed, happy, present in a way that seems impossible now, like a different person living a different life in a different universe where love was still possible. When did he stop smiling at his son? When did he stop seeing Milo as Source of joy instead of a reminder of everything he'd lost. When did he start treating his own child like a business problem, to be managed rather than a miracle to be celebrated? The next morning, something unprecedented happens in the Vance household. Lorian comes to breakfast, not to grab coffee and rush out to a meeting, his phone already pressed to his ear as he talks to colleagues in different time zones. Not to check emails while standing at the counter, multitasking his way through another obligation. He actually sits down at the kitchen island wearing jeans and a casual shirt instead of his usual armor of expensive suits. The transformation is so unexpected that Milo actually stops eating, his spoon suspended halfway to his mouth as he stares at this stranger who looks like his father, but is dressed like a person who might have time for conversation. For a moment, neither of them speaks. The silence stretches between them, filled with 7 years of missed conversations and accumulated distance, weighted with all the words they've never said and all the connections they've never made. Lorian realizes, with growing panic, that he doesn't know how to talk to his own child. What do 7-year-olds think about? What do they care about beyond the safe territory of academic performance and behavioral expectations? What do they need to hear from their fathers beyond instructions and corrections and the distant approval that comes with meeting standards? "Mind if I join you?" he asks awkwardly, gesturing to the empty stool beside his son as if he's requesting permission to enter his own kitchen. Milo nods but doesn't speak, still processing this unprecedented development. They sit in what might charitably be called companionable silence for several minutes. They only sound the clink of spoons against bowls and the distant hum of traffic far below, the city waking up in the world beyond their marble fortress. "How's school?" Lorian finally asks, falling back on the safe territory of academic performance because it's the only aspect of his son's life that he feels qualified to discuss. "Fine," Milo responds automatically, the answer he's learned to give when adults ask questions they don't really want detailed responses to. It's the verbal equivalent of making himself small and unnoticeable, offering just enough engagement to satisfy the requirement for interaction without risking the vulnerability of actually sharing something real. Another silence. Longer this. Time filled with the weight of everything they don't know how to say to each other. Lorian clears his throat and tries again, venturing into slightly more personal territory. "What's your favorite subject?" This time Milo looks directly at his father, as if trying to determine whether this is a real question or just polite conversation, whether his answer will be heard or filed away as another data point in the careful management of his childhood. "Art," he says quietly, testing the waters with the kind of caution that children develop when they've learned that their preferences and passions are either irrelevant or inconvenient to the adults who control their world. "What do you like to draw?" Lorian asks, and something in his voice, a genuine curiosity perhaps, or maybe just the unfamiliar experience of having his father's undivided attention, encourages Milo to venture into honesty. "Families," Milo says simply, and the word hits Lorian like a physical blow. "I draw families doing things together, like going to parks and eating dinner and—" He trails off, suddenly self-conscious, as if he's revealed too much about the longing that drives his artistic expression. "What else do families do in your drawings?" The question seems to surprise Milo, as if he wasn't expecting follow-up interest, wasn't prepared for an adult to actually care about the details of his inner world. "They hug," he says, so quietly Lorian almost misses it. "They hug a lot. And they sit close together when they watch movies. And the daddies pick up the little kids and swing them around until they laugh so hard they can't breathe." The simple honesty of it nearly breaks Lorian's heart. Here's his son, creating with crayons and construction paper the life he wishes he had, drawing with the desperate hope of a child who believes that if he can imagine something strongly enough, maybe it will become real. "The families in my drawings always eat breakfast together," Milo continues, emboldened by his father's attention, "and they ask each other about their dreams. Not the scary kind of dreams, but the good kind, the kind where you wish for things that would make you happy." "What do you wish for?" Lorian asks, and the question surprises him as much as it does Milo. When did he stop caring about his son's dreams? When did he stop believing that a child's wishes might be worth hearing, worth honoring, worth making real? Milo considers the question with the seriousness that children bring to important matters, his small face scrunched in concentration as he weighs whether it's safe to voice the deepest desires of his heart. "I wish," he begins, then stops, as if the words are too precious or too dangerous to speak aloud. "It's okay," Lorien says gently, and he means it more than he's meant anything in years. "You can tell me." "I wish I had a daddy who wanted to know about my day," Milo says in a rush, as if getting the words out quickly might make them hurt less. "And I wish someone would read me stories before bed, not just tell me it's time to go to sleep, and I wish—" He pauses, looking directly into his father's eyes with the kind of devastating honesty that only children possess. "I wish someone would hug me just because they wanted to, not because I was hurt or scared, or because it was something they had to do." The words land like arrows, each one finding its mark in the center of Lorien's chest. Here's his 7-year-old son, articulating with heartbreaking clarity exactly what's been missing from his life, exactly what his father's emotional absence has cost him. Over the following days, something shifts in the household dynamic. Zara becomes a bridge between father and son, suggesting small changes that feel revolutionary in the context of their previous relationship. She encourages Lorien to read bedtime stories instead of letting Milo manage his own nighttime routine in the lonely silence of his room. The first time Lorien sits on the edge of Milo's bed with a book in his hands, he feels like an actor playing a role he's never rehearsed. His voice shakes as he reads about magical kingdoms and brave knights and children who go on adventures and always find their way home to parents who love them. Milo listens with the kind of intense attention that suggests this is a miracle he's been praying for, that having his father's voice be the last thing he hears before sleep is a gift beyond measuring. Zara suggests family dinners twice a week, where conversation is encouraged and phones are banned, and the goal is connection rather than nutrition. She proposes weekend activities that don't involve tutors or educational enrichment or any kind of improvement project, just time spent together doing things that might qualify as fun. The first time Lorien tries to tie Milo's shoes, his hands shake so badly he can't manage the loops. He's negotiated billion-dollar deals, commanded boardrooms full of powerful men, made decisions that affect thousands of lives, but he can't tie his 7-year-old son's sneakers. "It's okay, Daddy," Milo says gently, covering his father's trembling hands with his small ones. "I can teach you. It's like making bunny ears, see? You make 2 loops and then you wrap them around each other and then you pull tight." And in that moment, Lorien realizes his son has been teaching him all along, about patience, about forgiveness, about the kind of love that doesn't keep score or demand perfection or require anything in return except presence. But progress isn't linear, and old habits have gravity that pulls you back into familiar patterns, even when you know they're destroying everything you claim to care about. When Global Industries, one of Vance Technology's most important clients, threatens to pull their contract over what they diplomatically term concerns about leadership stability, Lorien reverts to type, like a man falling back into quicksand. That feels safer than solid ground because at least it's familiar. The crisis consumes him with the voracious appetite of an addiction. 16-hour days become 18-hour days, then 20-hour marathons where he survives on coffee and adrenaline, and the familiar rush of being indispensable, irreplaceable, the man everyone calls when the impossible needs to become possible. The breakfast conversations that had begun to feel like small miracles disappear overnight. The bedtime stories that Milo had started to depend on get relegated to maybe tomorrow, promises that never materialize. He cancels dinner plans with increasingly elaborate excuses, works through weekends that he'd begun to think of as family time, and returns to his pattern of emotional absence, like a man putting on a familiar, suffocating coat. From the kitchen, Zara watches this regression with growing concern and the particular heartbreak that comes from seeing progress undone by fear. She recognizes the signs. She's seen it in parents in the pediatric ward who start to heal from their child's illness only to retreat into the familiar territory of anxiety when recovery becomes real and therefore capable of being lost again. She sees how Milo's tentative smiles fade back into quiet resignation, how the light that had begun to appear in his eyes dims like a candle being slowly extinguished. The boy begins to withdraw again, his brief moment of hope crushed under the familiar weight of a father who promises presence but delivers absence with the reliability of sunrise. The self-harm doesn't return, not yet, but something worse takes its place: acceptance. Milo stops expecting his father to show up. He stops saving interesting stories from school to share over dinner that never happens. He stops asking when Daddy will be home, stops waiting by the window for a car that arrives later and later each night. One evening, as Zara helps Milo with homework at the kitchen island where they used to have family breakfasts before crisis, reclaimed priority, he asks a question that chills her to the bone. "Zara, do you think my daddy wishes I went to heaven with mommy instead of her?" Zara's pencil stops moving across the paper, where she's been helping him with math problems that suddenly seem insignificant compared to the devastating equation her young charge is trying to solve. "Oh, honey, no. Why would you think that?" "Because he only gets sad when he looks at me," Milo explains with the heartbreaking logic of a child who's been studying adult behavior like a detective trying to solve the mystery of his own unworthiness. "Maybe I remind him too much of her. Maybe that's why he doesn't want to be around me. Maybe if I wasn't here, he could be happy again." The logic is devastating in its childlike simplicity. Milo has been watching his father's patterns, drawing conclusions with the observational skills that children possess in abundance when their survival depends on reading adult moods. And he's decided that his very existence, is the source of his father's pain. "Sometimes," he continues, his voice getting smaller with each word, "I think about what it would be like if I was invisible, if I could just disappear and not bother anyone anymore. Then Daddy could work all he wanted and not feel bad about not having time for me." That night, Zara makes a decision that will change everything. She's going to take Milo somewhere special, somewhere that might help both father and son understand what they're truly missing, what family can look like when it's built on presence instead of guilt, on love instead of obligation. She's going to introduce him to her chosen family at Sunshine House, the community center where she volunteers every Saturday with children who've learned that families can be built from broken pieces and healing hearts. Saturday morning dawns bright and clear over Manhattan, one of those perfect October days that makes you believe in new beginnings and second chances. The air is crisp with the promise of changing seasons, and Central Park spreads out below, the penthouse windows like a living painting of gold and amber, and deep, rich greens that seem to glow with their own inner light. Zara has been planning this day for weeks, ever since she realized that Milo needs to see what family connection actually looks like when it's not filtered through grief and guilt and the crushing weight of unspoken expectations. He needs to witness what she's learned in her own healing journey, that sometimes the most important families are the ones we choose, the ones we build from shared experience and mutual understanding rather than accident of birth. "Would you like to come with me to meet some special friends?" she asks Milo over breakfast, watching as he methodically arranges his cereal into geometric patterns rather than eating it. A new habit that worries her more than his previous refusal to eat at all. Milo looks up with the careful expression he wears when adults make unexpected requests, his dark eyes holding that wariness that comes from having learned that adult promises are fragile things, easily broken by more important obligations. "What kind of friends?" "Kids who understand what it's like to miss someone important," she explains gently. "Kids who've learned that families can be built in lots of different ways, that love doesn't always look like what we see in movies or books." From his study, down the hall comes the familiar sound of Lorian's voice, sharp with tension, as he conducts yet another crisis call. Something about market volatility and investor confidence and the need to project strength during uncertain times. The language of a man who's forgotten that there are more important things than quarterly reports, more valuable things than profit margins. Zara pokes her head into the study to let him know they're going out. Lorian gives a distracted wave, barely looking up from his laptop screen covered in spreadsheets and emergency projections that will determine the fate of deals worth hundreds of millions. "Just be back by 6, he says. his attention already returning to the numbers that have become his refuge from anything resembling real life. Milo has chess lessons with Professor Williams. We can't let his academic schedule suffer because of extracurricular activities. As they walk through Central Park toward the designated picnic area, Milo stays close to Zara's side, his small hand gripping hers with the kind of desperate trust that comes from having learned that good things in his life tend to disappear without warning. He's overwhelmed by the chaos and noise of normal families, enjoying a Saturday in the park, children laughing with abandon, parents who seem genuinely delighted by their offspring's existence, the casual physical affection that flows between people who take love for granted. "Are you nervous?" Zara asks gently, noticing how his grip tightens as they approach the sound of children playing in the distance. "A little," he admits, his voice barely audible over the ambient sounds of happiness that surround them. "What if they don't like me? What if I don't know how to play the right way?" "Oh, sweetheart," Zara says, stopping to kneel at his level. So they're eye to eye. "These kids are going to love you. They understand what it feels like to be different, to have something missing that other kids take for granted. They know what it's like to feel lonely even when you're surrounded by people." At the picnic area, which has been decorated with balloons and streamers that flutter in the autumn breeze like prayers made visible, Milo meets 6 other children who carry the invisible wounds that come with losing parents too early. But what strikes him immediately is not their sadness but their joy, the kind of hard-won happiness that comes from having faced the worst and discovered that love still exists on the other side of loss. There's Sarah, an 8-year-old with pigtails, and a gap-toothed grin whose military father died in Afghanistan when she was 4. She carries a small American flag pin on her jacket and talks about her daddy with the kind of pride that transcends grief. Tommy, age 9, whose mother lost her battle with cancer 2 years ago, but who's learned to bake her famous chocolate chip cookies from memory because she lives on in recipes. Maria, 12, who survived the car accident that took both her parents and carries scars on her arms, that she's learned to see as proof of her strength rather than reminders of her loss. There's James, 6, whose firefighter father died trying to save others, and who wants to be a firefighter too, so Daddy and I can be heroes together in heaven someday. Little Emma, 5, whose grandmother raised her after her parents died of an overdose, and who draws pictures of angels that look suspiciously like the family she never really knew, but refuses to stop loving. At first, Milo hangs back, overwhelmed by the easy camaraderie these children share, the way they move through grief and joy with equal fluency. He's not used to groups, not used to the spontaneous laughter and casual physical affection that flows between kids who've learned not to take happiness for granted because they know how quickly it can disappear. But then something magical happens, something that Zara has been hoping for but couldn't dare expect. Sarah, a precocious girl with missing front teeth and eyes that sparkle with the kind of mischief that suggests resilience rather than recklessness, breaks away from a game of tag and runs straight to Milo, with the confidence of someone who's learned that introductions are just invitations to friendship waiting to happen. "You must be Milo," she announces with the kind of enthusiastic certainty that only children possess. "Zara told us you were coming. I'm Sarah, and you look like you need to learn how to have fun." Before Milo can protest or retreat into his usual careful politeness, Sarah grabs his hand with fingers that are sticky from juice boxes and still warm from the simple pleasure of being alive in a world that hasn't always been kind, but has taught her that kindness is always a choice. "Come on," she shouts, tugging him toward the playground with irresistible momentum. "We're playing zombie tag and Tommy's it, but he's a really slow zombie because he's still learning to run with his new prosthetic leg." And for the first time in years, maybe for the first time ever, Milo runs. Really runs with the wind in his hair and laughter bubbling up from somewhere deep inside that he'd forgotten existed. He chases the other children around the playground equipment, tagged and tagging back, completely absorbed in the simple revolutionary joy of being a kid among other kids who understand what it means to be different, but refuse to let different mean less than. Zara watches from a bench, her heart swelling with something that feels like hope mixed with heartbreak. This is what childhood should look like. This is what Milo has been missing, not just parental love but peer connection, the sense of belonging that comes from being understood without having to explain yourself or apologize for taking up space in the world. For 2 hours, Milo experiences something he's never had before, the feeling of being part of something bigger than his own loneliness. He plays games where the rules change spontaneously, and everyone laughs when someone makes a mistake. He shares snacks with kids who don't judge him for eating too slowly or not finishing everything on his plate. He joins conversations where children talk about their lost parents with love instead of just sadness, where grief is acknowledged but doesn't get to be the only emotion in the room. As the afternoon winds down and the October sun begins its descent toward the Manhattan skyline, painting everything in shades of gold that make the ordinary world look magical, the children sprawl on picnic blankets like flowers in a field. They share snacks and stories with the easy intimacy of those who've learned that vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness, that showing your scars doesn't make you broken, it makes you brave. Milo sits in the center of the group, more animated than Zara has ever seen him. His cheeks are flushed from running, his carefully combed hair is mussed with the beautiful chaos of actual play, and his eyes shine with something that looks remarkably like happiness, not the careful, performance-based satisfaction that comes from meeting adult expectations, but the genuine joy that bubbles up when children feel safe enough to be themselves. "My mum used to make the best chocolate chip cookies," Tommy says, munching thoughtfully on a store-bought one from their lunch spread. "They were always a little burned on the bottom, but she said, that's how you knew they were made with love, instead of just following a recipe." "My dad sang really loud in the car," Sarah adds, giggling at the memory in a way that suggests she's learned to find joy in remembrance rather than just pain. "So embarrassing when we'd pull up to school. But I kind of miss it. He knew all the words to every song on the radio, even the really old ones from when dinosaurs roamed the earth. My parents used to dance in the kitchen while dinner was cooking," Maria shares, her voice soft with the kind of remembrance that's learned to be grateful instead of just bitter. "They'd spin me around between them, and I felt like I was flying. Like our kitchen was the most magical place in the whole world." The children continue sharing memories, weaving a tapestry of love and loss that somehow manages to feel celebratory rather than tragic. These kids have learned something that many adults never master, that remembering the dead with joy honors them more than mourning them with bitterness, that love doesn't end just because life does. "What about your mum and dad?" Maria asks Milo, including him in the circle of sharing with the natural generosity of children who recognize a kindred spirit, even when he doesn't recognize himself. "My mum went to heaven when I was little," Milo says matter-of-factly, using the careful language he's learned for discussing the undiscussable. "I don't remember her very much, but Zara says she loved me a lot, and my dad, he works really hard all the time, even on weekends and holidays and when I'm sick." The other children nod with understanding. That comes from having learned to navigate the complicated geography of loss and abandonment. They've all had to master the art of explaining family structures that don't fit normal patterns, of making sense of love that exists but doesn't always show up in recognizable ways. "But you have Zara," Tommy points out with the logical optimism of someone who's learned to find family in unexpected places. "She's like everyone's mom here. She takes care of all of us." "Yeah," Sarah agrees enthusiastically, throwing her arms around Zara in the kind of spontaneous hug that adults often forget how to give. She remembers everyone's favorite snacks, and she knows all the best stories, and she never gets tired of our questions, even the really weird ones about why clouds don't fall down or whether fish get thirsty. Milo looks around the circle of faces. Children who've experienced loss but found connection. Kids who've been broken but are learning to heal together. Young people who understand that family isn't just about blood relations, but about who shows up, who cares, who stays when staying gets difficult. And then, in a voice so quiet it's almost carried away by the autumn breeze rustling through the park trees, he asks the question that will shatter his father's world and force a reckoning that's been 5 years in the making. "Are they my brothers and sisters?" He's looking directly at Zara when he says it, his dark eyes wide with wonder and longing, and a hope so fragile it could shatter with a careless word or a moment's hesitation. "I never had any before," he continues, his voice gaining strength. As he voices the dream he's been afraid to speak aloud. "Are they? Can I have brothers and sisters even if my mom and dad didn't give me any?" Zara's breath catches in her throat. She understands what he's really asking. Can I belong here? Can I be part of something bigger than the lonely world I've been living in? Can I have siblings even though my biological family consists of one? Parent who's too scared to love me the way I need to be loved? "They're your friends, sweetheart," she says gently, carefully, trying to honor his longing without promising more than the situation can deliver. Really, really good friends who understand what you've been through. But they feel like family, Milo insists with the stubborn honesty that children use when they've stumbled onto a truth that adults try to complicate with logic and limitation. Is this what having brothers and sisters feels like? Like you're not alone anymore? Like there are people who want to play with you just because they like you, not because they have to? Unknown to either of them, 30 feet away behind a large oak tree, whose branches provide cover for both shade and secrets, Lorian Vance stands frozen in a moment that will haunt him for the rest of his life. Lorian had finished his crisis calls early, a minor miracle that had felt almost suspicious until this moment, as if the universe had conspired to bring him here precisely when he needed to witness the truth about his son's life. Something about seeing Milo's empty room, his abandoned chess set, the silence that had become so normal he'd forgotten it wasn't natural. Something had driven him out of his climate-controlled office and into the October afternoon to find his family. His family. When had he last thought of Milo and Zara as his family, rather than his responsibility and employee? He'd walked through Central Park with the purposeful stride of a man accustomed to having destinations and schedules, but as he'd gotten closer, to the sound of children's laughter, real laughter, the kind that comes from joy rather than politeness, his pace had slowed. Then stopped entirely, because there in the center of a group of children he'd never seen before was his son, his quiet, careful, perpetually sad son, laughing with an abandon that Lorian couldn't remember ever witnessing. This child who moved through their penthouse like a ghost was running and shouting and tumbling on grass with the kind of physical freedom that suggested he'd been storing up energy for years, waiting for a safe place to release it. Milo was playing. Actually playing. His face flushed with exertion and joy, his expensive school clothes rumpled and grass-stained in ways that would have horrified the succession of nannies who'd tried and failed to understand that children need mess more than they need perfection. But it was the question, that innocent, devastating question, that brought Lorian to his knees both literally and metaphorically. Are they my brothers and sisters? The words hit him like a physical assault, driving the air from his lungs and sending him stumbling backward against the rough bark of the oak tree that now serves as both hiding place and confessional booth. His legs give out, and he finds himself sitting on the ground like a man who's been struck by lightning and is still trying to understand why everything looks different now. His 7-year-old child is so starved for family connection that he sees siblings in a group of children he just met. Milo has been living in emotional isolation so complete that this brief taste of belonging feels revolutionary to him, transformative in ways that a lifetime of expensive toys and exclusive schools and material advantages never could. "I want a family like this," he hears Milo say to Zara, his young voice cracking with longing that cuts through his father's chest like a dull knife, tearing rather than slicing cleanly. "Not just me and Daddy being quiet all the time. I want people who laugh with me and play with me and want to hear about my day even when nothing special happened." His small voice breaks completely, and Lorian can see tears tracking down his son's face even from this distance. "I want to belong somewhere," Milo whispers, and the words shatter every wall Lorian has built around his heart, every defense he's constructed against the possibility of being hurt again. Lorian doubles over as if he's been physically assaulted, one hand pressed against the tree for support, the other clutched against his chest, where his heart feels like it's tearing itself apart. All this time, he thought he was protecting his son from pain by maintaining emotional distance, He told himself that providing material security was enough, that love was a luxury they couldn't afford after Elizabeth's death. That survival required walls and discipline, and the kind of strength that doesn't allow for vulnerability. But he hasn't been protecting Milo. He's been abandoning him. The realization tears through him like lightning illuminating a landscape he'd never bothered to really look at. His son doesn't just want a family, he needs one. He needs it the way plants need sunlight, the way lungs need air, the way hearts need hope. And the man who should be providing that family, the man who should be his safe harbor, his champion, his source of unconditional love, has been too broken, too afraid, too selfishly committed to his own pain to give it to him. Worse, it's taken a stranger, this remarkable woman who barely knows them, to show Milo what love actually looks like when it's not filtered through fear and obligation. Zara, who's been with them for only a few months, has managed to create more family connection than Lorien has provided in 5 years of biological fatherhood. From his hiding place, Lorien watches as Zara gathers the children for group photos, positioning herself in the center, with her arms spread wide to encompass as many little bodies as possible. The kids cluster around her like flowers turning toward the sun, climbing on her lap, hanging from her arms, all of them laughing with the infectious joy of children who've learned that love multiplies when it's shared rather than diminishes, when it's divided. And there's Milo pressed against her side, grinning wider than Lorien has seen since Elizabeth died. His son has found a mother figure, not because he chose to replace Elizabeth, but because he desperately needed someone to love him unconditionally, someone to be present, someone to see him as more than a responsibility or a reminder of loss. The group begins to pack up their picnic supplies, children hugging goodbye with promises to see each other next week, making plans that assume continuity and connection. Lorien realizes he's standing at the most important crossroads of his life. He can continue living as he has, successful, wealthy, emotionally dead, surrounded by luxury and strangled by loneliness. Or he can fight for his son, fight for the family they could still become, the connection that might still be possible if he has the courage to tear down the walls he spent 5 years building brick by careful brick. But fighting means facing the pain he spent half a decade avoiding. It means admitting he's failed as a father in the most fundamental ways. It means risking his heart again after it was already broken beyond what he thought was repair. It means choosing love over safety, presence over protection, vulnerability, over the kind of strength that's really just fear wearing expensive clothing. The question echoes in his mind like a prayer and a judgment. Are they my brothers and sisters? His son's longing for siblings he's never had, for family connections that should have been his birthright, for the simple joy of belonging somewhere. It all comes down to this moment, this choice, this chance to finally answer the real question Milo has been asking all along. Am I worth loving? Do I matter? Will someone fight for me? Watching his son hug each of the other children goodbye, hearing him promise to come back next week with the kind of hope that believes in continuity, seeing him experience the kind of family warmth that should have been as natural as breathing, Lorien knows the answer. Milo isn't just worth the risk of loving again, he's worth everything. The question now is whether his father is brave enough to prove it. That evening, after Milo is tucked into bed with stories about his new friends still dancing in his eyes like stars he's finally learned to wish upon, Lorien finds Zara in the kitchen. She's moving through her nightly routine of preparing meals. For the next day, humming softly, a melody her grandmother used to sing while cooking Sunday dinners for 3 generations of family who understood that love is spelled T-I-M-E. The sound stops Lorien in the doorway like a physical barrier. When was the last time he heard music in this house? When was the last time these sterile marble surfaces witnessed anything resembling domestic comfort? When did his home become a showplace instead of a haven? The kitchen, usually a monument to expensive efficiency, feels different tonight. Zara has added small touches that shouldn't matter, but somehow transform everything. Fresh flowers in a simple vase, a hand-drawn picture from one of the Sunshine House children magneted to the refrigerator, the warm smell of something homemade, baking in an oven that had been used primarily for reheating takeout from Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants. "We need to talk," he says, his voice carrying a weight that makes Zara turn immediately, reading the gravity in his expression with the intuition of someone who spent years interpreting the unspoken language of pain and hope in equal measure. "Of course," she responds, setting down the knife she'd been using to prepare vegetables for tomorrow's meals, a domestic ritual that speaks of someone who plans for continuity, who believes in tomorrow enough to prepare for it. "Should I put on tea?" They sit across from each other at the kitchen island, the same space where Milo eats his lonely breakfasts every morning, where homework gets completed in efficient silence, where conversation has been rationed like a precious resource in a world of artificial scarcity. But tonight something feels different. The space seems smaller, more intimate, charged with the possibility of truth-telling and the kind of honest reckoning that can either destroy relationships or transform them into something stronger. "I heard what happened at the park today," Lorien begins, his voice rough with emotions he's kept buried for so long. They feel foreign in his throat, like speaking a language he once knew fluently but has almost forgotten. Zara's hand freezes halfway to her teacup, her dark eyes widening with concern and something that might be recognition, the look of someone who's been waiting for this conversation while hoping it would never be necessary. "Mr. Vance, I can explain—" "No," he interrupts, holding up a hand that trembles slightly with the accumulated weight of 5 years of suppressed feeling. "I don't need an explanation. I need to understand something. How did you know? How did you know what he needed when his own father, didn't?" The question hangs between them, heavy with pain and hope in equal measure. For a moment, the only sound is the distant hum of the city below. Millions of people living their lives, loving their families, making the kinds of memories that Lorien has spent 5 years avoiding. And the quiet tick of the antique clock that Elizabeth had chosen for this room back when it had felt like a home instead of a museum. "Because I've been him," Zara says quietly, her voice carrying the kind of truth that can only come from lived experience, from having walked through the same dark valleys and somehow found a path back to the light. Not exactly, but close enough to recognize the signs, close enough to see what happens to children when the adults who are supposed to love them become too afraid to show it. And then she tells him about Michael and David, about the summer day when she was 17 and thought she was old enough, responsible enough, mature enough to watch her little brothers while their parents drove to town for groceries and the weekly errands that keep families functioning. She tells him about the phone call from Marcus, the boy she had a crush on, and how his attention made her feel special and grown up and important in ways that watching her siblings never could. She tells him about losing track of time while they flirted and laughed and made plans for a future that would never come to pass. She tells him about the silence that followed, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something terrible that she didn't yet understand. About finding Michael's favorite toy truck abandoned by the lake's edge, about David's small sneakers lined up neatly on the dock as if he'd planned to come back for them. "I was supposed to protect them," she whispers, her voice cracking with a grief that 5 years of therapy and good works and helping other children hasn't fully healed. "I was the big sister. It was my job to keep them safe. And I failed. I failed in the most fundamental way possible." Her hands shake as she reaches for her tea, and Lorien notices scars on her wrists that he's never seen before. Thin white lines that speak of a pain so profound it demanded physical expression. "The guilt nearly killed me," she continues, her voice steadier now, but still carrying the weight of someone who's learned to live with wounds that never completely heal. Not just the immediate pain, but the long-term understanding that one moment of distraction, one choice to prioritize my own needs over their safety, cost them everything. Cost my parents their babies. Cost me the chance to see them grow up, to be the sister they deserved. "But you were just a child yourself," Lorien points out, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice, by the compassion he feels for her younger self, despite his own carefully maintained emotional distance. 17 isn't that old. You couldn't have known. 17 isn't that young either," Zara counters, her eyes shining with unshed tears that she's learned to hold back through years of practice. And besides, guilt doesn't care about logic. Guilt doesn't care about circumstances or age or good intentions or the fact that you're a child trying to do an adult's job. It just sits in your chest like a stone, reminding you every day that you had one job, protect the people you love, and you couldn't do it. She pauses, studying his face with the careful attention of someone who recognizes a fellow traveler on the road of regret. Someone who understands that the worst prisons are the ones we build for ourselves out of shame and self-recrimination. I'm guessing you know something about that kind of guilt. The kind that doesn't fade with time, that doesn't respond to logic or forgiveness or all the well-meaning people who tell you it wasn't your fault. Lorien nods slowly, feeling something crack open in his chest, a fissure in the armor he's worn for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe, without it constricting his lungs, his heart, his capacity for connection. The night Elizabeth died, we fought, he admits, the words feeling strange and sharp in his mouth, like glass he's been carrying inside himself for years, finally finding a way out. About exactly what you've been telling me, that I was putting work before family, that I was becoming a stranger to my own son, that I was prioritizing success over presence, achievement over love. He pauses, the memory still sharp as broken glass after all these years, still capable of cutting him when he handles it without careful protection. She wanted me to take a step back from the company, to be more available, more present. She said Milo was starting to flinch when I raised my voice, that he was learning to be afraid of disappointing me instead of excited about making me proud. His voice drops to barely above a whisper, as if speaking the words too loudly might give them more power to hurt than they already possess. I told her she was being unreasonable, naive. I said someone had to be responsible for our future. Someone had to think beyond the moment, beyond what felt good right now. I accused her of not understanding the pressure I was under, the weight of providing for our family's security in a world that doesn't care about good intentions or loving hearts. He stands abruptly, unable to sit still under the weight of memory and self-recrimination, and moves to the window where the city lights blur through tears he refuses to acknowledge. She was driving to her sister's house to cool off when it happened, to think about whether our marriage could survive my transformation into someone she didn't recognize. If I had listened to her, agreed to try, she would have stayed home that night. She would have been safe in our bed instead of on that street corner where a drunk driver ran a red light and stole everything that mattered. And the drunk driver would have hit someone else, Zara says gently but firmly, her voice carrying the authority of someone who's wrestled with similar demons and found a way to coexist with them. Or maybe he would have hit a tree instead. Or maybe he never would have gotten behind the wheel if 100 different variables had been different. You can't know what would have happened, just like I can't know if being more careful would have saved my brothers. She rises and moves to stand beside him at the window, close enough that he can feel her warmth, but not so close that he feels crowded or pressured. But we can't stop punishing ourselves either, she continues, her reflection joining his in the glass that separates them from the glittering city below. And more importantly, we can't keep punishing the people we love for the mistakes we think we made. We can't make them pay the price for our guilt. I don't know how to stop, Lorien admits, and the confession feels like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory where all his usual strategies for control and management are useless. I don't know how to be around him without seeing her, without remembering what I lost, without being terrified that if I love him too much, something will happen to him too. So you love him too little instead, Zara observes, her voice free. Of judgment but full of understanding that comes from having made similar choices for similar reasons. You keep him at arm's length, thinking that if you don't get too attached, it won't hurt as much if something goes wrong. You tell yourself that emotional distance is protection, that caring less is safer than caring more. Exactly. How's that? Working out for you? The question hangs in the air between them, and Lorien realizes with startling clarity that his strategy has been a complete and catastrophic failure. He spent 5 years trying to protect himself from further loss and, in the process, he's lost his son anyway, not to death but to his own fear, his own inability to choose love over safety. It's not, he says simply, the admission carrying the weight of 5 years of accumulated regret. It's not working at all. I've been so afraid of losing him that I never really had him. I've been so focused on protecting myself from pain that I became the source of his pain. The next morning, Lorien does something he hasn't done in 5 years. He cancels every meeting on his calendar, ignores the crisis calls from Hong Kong, and declares it a family day with the kind of executive authority he usually reserves for mergers and acquisitions. "But Daddy, it's Monday," Milo says, staring in confusion at his father, who's appeared at breakfast wearing jeans and a casual shirt instead of the tailored suits that have become his armor against the world. "I know," Lorien says, settling onto the stool beside his son with movements that feel both foreign and natural, like remembering how to ride a bicycle after years of forgetting you ever knew how. Sometimes Mondays need to be different. Sometimes we need to remember that the most important business happens at home, at this table, in conversations that don't have agendas or quarterly projections. They start with pancakes, a disaster, of epic proportions, since neither Lorien nor Milo has ever attempted to make them from scratch. The kitchen becomes a battlefield of flour and eggshells, and the kind of beautiful chaos that comes when people prioritize connection over perfection. Zara guides them through the process from her position at the stove, laughing as they argue about measurements and whether chocolate chips constitute an acceptable breakfast ingredient for a Monday morning when all the rules are apparently suspended. "Mommy used to make pancakes," Milo says suddenly, then looks worried as if he's broken some unspoken rule by mentioning her name, by bringing the ghost of Elizabeth into their fragile new dynamic. The kitchen falls silent, except for the sizzle of batter in the pan. Lorien feels his throat tighten with the familiar panic that always accompanies any mention of Elizabeth, the reflexive need to change the subject or retreat into work or find some other way to avoid the pain that comes with remembering what he's lost. But this time, instead of fleeing, he forces himself to stay present, to sit with the discomfort, to honor his son's need to remember his mother instead of pretending she never existed. "She did," he confirms, his voice steadier than he expected it to be. "She was terrible at them. Always burned the first batch because she'd get distracted, trying to do 3 other things at the same time." "Really?" Milo's eyes widen with the delight children feel when they discover that their perfect parents were actually human, actually flawed, actually relatable in ways that make love feel more accessible rather than less so. "Really? She used to say the kitchen was where her perfectionism went to die, that cooking was the one place where she couldn't control every variable and had to learn to embrace the beautiful disasters that happen when you're more focused on love than precision." It's the first time Lorien has shared a memory of Elizabeth with his son in a way that celebrates her humanity rather than mythologizing her perfection. The first time he's spoken her name aloud in years without feeling like he was going to shatter into pieces that could never be reassembled. Milo absorbs this information with the seriousness that children bring to revelations about their parents' hidden humanity, their secret struggles, their private victories, over the same kinds of imperfection that children wrestle with every day. "Do you miss her?" he asks. And the question is so direct, so innocent, that it catches Lorien completely off guard. Every instinct screams at him to deflect, to change the subject, to retreat behind the walls that have kept him safe for so long. But Zara is watching him with encouraging eyes, and his son deserves the truth, deserves to know that grief doesn't diminish love, that missing someone doesn't mean forgetting to live, that mourning can coexist with joy if you're brave enough to let both emotions have space in your heart. "Every day," he admits, and the words feel like a dam breaking, releasing a flood of feeling he's kept carefully contained for years. "But I think she would be sad about how quiet our house became after she left. I think she would want us to keep living, keep laughing, keep making memories even though she can't be here to share them." "Yeah," Milo agrees softly, his small hand finding his father's larger one with the kind of instinctive comfort that children offer when they sense an adult's pain. "It's been really quiet. Sometimes I forget what it sounds like when people are happy in this house. Would you like it to be less quiet?" Milo's face lights up with the first real smile Lorien has seen in years, not the careful, polite expression he's learned to wear for adults who expect good behavior, but a genuine burst of joy that transforms his entire being and reminds Lorien of Elizabeth's smile, of the way happiness used to live in this house before grief moved in and claimed all the space. "Yes, please," he says, and the simple request carries the weight of 5 years of longing, 5 years of hoping that someday his father might choose presence over absence, connection over protection, love over the fear that masquerades as strength. They spend the day doing ordinary things that feel extraordinary, because they're doing them together, creating the kind of memories that children carry into adulthood as proof that they were loved, that they mattered, that someone thought they were worth investing time in. They visit the Museum of Natural History, where Milo delights in explaining dinosaur facts he's learned from books, his enthusiasm bubbling over as he finally has someone to share his passion, with someone who listens with genuine interest instead of polite tolerance. "Did you know that Triceratops had 3 horns, but they weren't just for fighting?" Milo asks, his small hand tugging his father toward the massive skeletal display. "They were also for showing off to other dinosaurs, like saying, 'Look how strong and beautiful I am.' Kind of like how peacocks show their feathers." "I didn't know that," Lorien says, and he means it. He's learning that his son is brilliant in ways that standardized tests can't measure, curious about the world in ways that make ordinary facts feel magical. They get ice cream for lunch, which feels wonderfully rebellious and makes Milo giggle, with the kind of shocked delight that comes from watching your parent break their own rules, from discovering that sometimes the people in charge can be spontaneous and fun, instead of always responsible and serious. They feed ducks in the very park where yesterday's revelation occurred, and Lorien finds himself seeing the space through different eyes, not as the site of his humiliation, but as the place where his awakening began, where he finally understood what he'd been missing all these years. And they talk, really talk, about school and friends and dreams and fears and all the small details that make up a child's inner world. Lorien learns that his son wants to be a veterinarian because animals need someone to take care of them when they're hurt. And I know what it feels like to hurt and not have anyone notice. He discovers that Milo is afraid of thunderstorms but loves the rain, that he sometimes dreams about flying over the city and seeing everything from a perspective where all the problems look small and manageable, that he wishes he could meet his mother in his dreams, but she never visits him there. "What about you, Daddy?" Milo asks as they walk home through the golden afternoon light that makes Manhattan look like a fairy tale city. "What did you want to be when you were little?" Lorien has to think about it. It's been so long since he considered any version of himself other than the driven businessman, the master of the universe, the man who conquered every challenge except the most important one, being present for the people who needed him most. "A teacher," he says finally, surprising himself with the memory that surfaces from decades of buried dreams. "I wanted to be a high school history teacher. I thought it would be amazing to help kids understand how the past connects to the present, how the choices people made long ago still affect us today." "You could still do that," Milo says with the matter-of-fact optimism of childhood, the beautiful belief that it's never too late to become who you're supposed to be, that adults have the same freedom to reinvent themselves that children take for granted. Grown-ups can change their minds about jobs. Mrs. Patterson at school used to be a lawyer, and now she teaches 3rd grade because she says kids are more honest than judges. The simple wisdom of it stops Lorien in his tracks. Here's his 7-year-old son, offering him permission to reinvent himself, to choose meaning over money, purpose over profit, connection over the kind of conquest that leaves you rich in everything, except what matters. "Maybe I will," Lorien says, and for the first time in decades, the idea of doing something because it brings joy rather than because it generates revenue feels possible instead of naive. But the outside world doesn't make change easy, and old patterns have gravitational pull that threatens to drag you back into familiar orbits, even when you've decided to chart a different course. Tuesday morning brings a crisis at Vance Technologies that threatens to pull Lorien back into the familiar whirlpool of urgent meetings and crisis management that has defined his adult life. Global Industries, one of their biggest clients, isn't just threatening to pull their contract. They're actively shopping for Lorien's replacement, citing concerns about his recent instability and lack of focus on core business priorities. Apparently, Word has spread through the tight-knit world of corporate Manhattan about his cancelled meetings, his new domestic situation, his sudden unavailability for the kind of round-the-clock dedication that the business world demands from its titans. In a community where worth is measured by billable hours and responsiveness to crisis, Lorian's decision to prioritize family time is being interpreted as either a nervous breakdown or a dangerous lack of commitment. The emergency board meeting is scheduled for 8 a.m., and it's brutal from the moment Lorian walks into the conference room. 12 men in expensive suits look at him with expressions ranging from concern to barely concealed hostility, like shareholders who've discovered their CEO has been embezzling from the company pension fund. Your personal life is affecting our business relationships, Chairman Bradley declares without preamble, his voice cold with the kind of disapproval that powerful men use to discipline those who step out of line. This nanny situation is being perceived as problematic. Problematic how? Lorian asks, though he can already guess the direction this conversation is heading based on the carefully controlled expressions around the table. A single father, living with an unmarried woman of a different race, playing house with his child while neglecting his fiduciary responsibilities. Bradley's smile is sharp with malice and barely concealed prejudice. Our investors are traditional people, Lorian. They like their CEOs to project stability, conventional values, the kind of image that inspires confidence in long-term planning and fiscal responsibility. The racism embedded in the comment hits Lorian like a slap, forcing him to confront the ugly reality of the world he's built his career in. These men aren't just questioning his business judgment. They're questioning his character based on the color of Zara's skin and their own narrow definitions of appropriate family structures. Taking care of my son is a traditional value, Lorian counters, but his voice lacks its usual authority because he's suddenly seeing these men clearly for the first time, understanding the moral bankruptcy that underlies their financial success. Hiring appropriate help is taking care of him, Bradley responds dismissively, as if the distinction between employing someone and loving someone is obvious to anyone with sense. This woman is clearly overstepping her boundaries. She's making, "You soft, distracted, unreliable. You've missed more meetings in the past month than in the previous 5 years combined." The pressure is immense and familiar, the kind of institutional weight that's designed to crush individual resistance and restore conformity to established patterns. These men control the board, and the board controls the company. Without Vance Technologies, Lorian has no wealth, no power, no identity, as he's understood it for the past 2 decades. But as he sits in that sterile conference room, surrounded by men in identical suits, talking about his family like a business problem to be solved, he thinks about Milo's question from the park. Are they my brothers and sisters? He thinks about his son, so desperate for connection that he finds family in strangers, so hungry for love that he's willing to accept crumbs of affection from anyone who shows him basic human kindness. He thinks about Zara, who walked into their broken house with her own wounds and somehow began to heal them all just by showing up, by being present, by demonstrating what it looks like when someone chooses love over fear. And he realizes that everything these men think makes him weak actually makes him strong. Everything they see as a liability is actually the most valuable thing he's ever found. They're measuring success by standards that have nothing to do with what makes life worth living. The meeting ends with an ultimatum disguised as an opportunity, delivered with the kind of corporate doublespeak that makes threats sound like gifts. That evening, as Lorian sits in his study trying to process the day's events and the impossible choice he's being forced to make, his phone rings. Chairman Bradley's name appears on the screen, and Lorian knows this call will determine the trajectory of the rest of his life. "We've been discussing your situation with some key stakeholders," Bradley announces without preamble, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who believes he holds all the cards and is about to play a winning hand. "And we've got a solution that could work for everyone involved. I'm listening." But even as Lorian says the words, part of him is already rebelling against whatever compromise is about to be offered. "Meridian Corp has made an offer," Bradley continues, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering wonderful news. $2.8 billion for a complete merger. It would make you one of the richest men in America, Lorian. You'd remain as CEO of the combined entity, but with a more traditional corporate structure, more oversight, more accountability to investors who understand what's at stake. Lorien can hear the unspoken conditions in Bradley's careful phrasing, can read between the lines of corporate speak to understand exactly what's being demanded. "What's the catch?" he asks, though he already knows. No catch exactly, just some restructuring to project the right image, to assure our investors that you're committed to the kind of leadership they expect from someone in your position. The Nanny situation would need to be resolved, of course. Our investors need to see stability, conventional family values, clear priorities. A man of your stature can't be perceived as unconventional in his domestic arrangements. The message is crystal clear. Take the money, lose Zara, keep the empire, sacrifice the family they're building. Choose wealth over love, power over presence, the familiar emptiness over the terrifying possibility of genuine connection. And if I refuse? Lorien asks, though he's not sure he wants to hear the answer. Then we'll be forced to consider other options for leadership. The board has a responsibility to shareholders, after all. We can't let personal attachment compromise fiduciary duty. I need time to think about it. 24 hours, Bradley responds with the clipped efficiency of a man accustomed to getting his way through a combination of pressure and deadline manipulation. The offer expires tomorrow at 5 p.m. After that, we'll be forced to interpret your hesitation as an answer, and we'll proceed accordingly. After he hangs up, Lorien sits in his study staring at the contract that arrived by messenger an hour later. $2.8 billion. Financial security beyond imagination. The culmination of everything he's worked for, the validation of every sacrifice he's made, the proof that he was right to choose ambition over everything else. But from the kitchen comes the sound of Zara reading bedtime stories to Milo, their voices mixing in the gentle rhythm of domestic happiness that he's only recently learned to recognize as the sound of home. It's the sound of family, the sound of love being lived out loud, the sound of everything money can't buy and power can't create. He walks quietly to Milo's doorway and watches as Zara tucks his son into bed with the kind of gentle care that speaks of genuine affection rather than mere duty. She smooths the covers, adjusts the nightlight and sits on the edge of the bed to answer Milo's sleepy questions about tomorrow's plans with the patience of someone who understands that children's questions are really requests for reassurance, that the world is stable, that love is reliable, that tomorrow will come and they won't face it alone. "Will you still be here when I wake up?" Milo asks, a question that carries the weight of too many disappearances, too many people who've left without explanation or warning. "I'll be here," Zara promises, and Lorien can hear the truth in her voice, the commitment that extends beyond employment into something deeper and more permanent. "I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart. What about Daddy? Will he have breakfast with us again tomorrow?" Zara glances toward the doorway where Lorien stands hidden in shadow, and their eyes meet for a moment that feels charged with possibility and heartbreak in equal measure. "That's up to your daddy," she says gently, her voice carrying hope tinged with the realism of someone who's learned not to make promises she can't control. "But I think he's learning that some things are more important than work, that some opportunities are worth more than money." As she finally turns off the light and joins Lorien in the hallway, they stand together in the dim space between his son's room and the study where a contract worth billions waits for his signature. "He's getting attached to you," Lorien says, quietly, voicing the fear that's been growing in his chest like a cancer. "And I'm terrified that you'll leave like everyone else has, that you'll decide this job is too complicated, too difficult, too emotionally demanding. And you're afraid that if he loses another mother figure, it might break him completely." Zara observes, her voice gentle but clear in its understanding of what's really at stake. "Everyone leaves eventually," Lorien says, giving voice to the belief that's shaped every relationship decision he's made since Elizabeth's death. It's better if he doesn't get too what? Too loved, too secure, too happy? Zara's voice carries a gentle challenge, the kind of loving confrontation that forces you to examine beliefs you've never questioned. "Lorien, that little boy, has been abandoned by everyone who was supposed to stay. Don't you think it's time someone proved that love doesn't always end in loss?" The question follows him back to his study, where he spends the night staring at documents that could secure his financial future while destroying the family he's just begun to build. By morning, he knows what he has to do. The choice, it turns out, isn't about money at all. It's about who he wants to be, what kind of father he wants to become, and whether he's brave enough to choose love over the fear that's been driving him for 5 years, $2.8 billion, or one little boy who just wants his daddy to stay home for breakfast. When morning comes, Lorian finally understands that it's not really a choice at all. Wednesday morning dawns grey and cold, hinting at winter's approach. Lorian finds Milo getting ready for school with quiet efficiency, a child who's learned self-sufficiency because depending on others proves unreliable. Watching his son's careful routine, Lorian feels sharp recognition. This is what he's created, a 7-year-old who's learned love is unreliable, that adults always have more important things to do. Milo, he says suddenly, urgency making his son look up warily. Can I ask you something really important? The boy nods, dark eyes curious and fearful. If Daddy had to choose between having lots of money and having a family, which do you think he should choose? Milo considers with intense seriousness, sensing this answer might actually matter. Well, he says finally, what good is money if you don't have anyone to spend it with? The wisdom stops Lorian cold, his 7-year-old articulating what took him 40 years to understand. And besides, Milo continues, standing to look directly into his father's eyes, you can't hug money. Money doesn't tell bedtime stories or make pancakes or teach you about dinosaurs. Money doesn't care if you're sad or scared. He pauses, studying his father's face. I don't need you to be rich, Daddy. I just need you to be here. I need you to want to be here because I matter to you. The words knock breath from Lorian's lungs. His son has handed him the answer to every question he's wrestled with. At 4:30 p.m., Lorian enters the boardroom where Bradley and board members wait with champagne and contracts. Merger documents spread across mahogany like offerings to capitalism. Gods, gentlemen, he says, settling with newfound calm. I've made my decision about the merger. Excellent, Bradley beams, reaching for champagne. I knew you'd see reason. You're right, the choice is obvious. Lorian picks up the contract, feeling its weight, not just paper, but everything it represents. Security, power, status, validation of every sacrifice made. Then, with calm deliberation, he tears it in half. Deafening silence follows, broken only by expensive paper falling like snow. I'm turning it down, Lorian says clearly. I'm also stepping down as CEO, effective immediately. I'll retain shares as primary stockholder, but I'm done with day-to-day operations. Bradley's face turns red. You'd give up billions for what? A nanny and ungrateful child? Lorian stands slowly, gathering his things with deliberate movements. I'm not giving up billions for a nanny and child. I'm trading money for love. I'm exchanging an empire for a family. I'm choosing presence over profit. He pauses at the door. My son is about to get something he's never had. A father who's actually present. A father who chooses him over profit margins. The most important inheritance isn't money, but memory of being unconditionally loved. When Lorian arrives home, he finds Zara and Milo working on a 1,000-piece puzzle of elephant families, walking across African savanna, simple domestic happiness that takes his breath away. Daddy! Milo races to hug him. You're home early. I'm home for good, Lorian says, lifting his son, feeling solid warmth he's been too afraid to embrace. How would you feel about having me around every day? For breakfast, dinner, homework, bedtime stories, all the stuff daddies should do. Really? You mean it? Milo's eyes shine with hope and disbelief. I mean it more than anything. Starting. Tomorrow, breakfast together every day. I want to hear about school, friends, dreams, all of it. What about important work meetings? Nothing's more important than you, Lorian says, meaning it completely for the first time. That evening they cook dinner together, all three crowded in the kitchen, finally feeling like home's heart. Zara teaches them her grandmother's cornbread recipe. They make beautiful mess of flour and laughter that money can't buy. They eat at the small breakfast table, and for the first time in 5 years, the penthouse fills with actual family sounds. Silverware clinking, stories sharing, love, lived out loud. "Zara," Milo says carefully while clearing dishes, "will you stay with us? Not just as nanny, but as family." The question hangs heavy with possibility. Zara looks at Lorien, searching his face for answers to unasked questions about love and commitment. "If that's what everyone wants," she says carefully, "then yes, I'd like that very much." "It's what we want," Lorien confirms, offering everything he has, not wealth or status, but his heart and son's heart, and chance to build something beautiful from broken pieces. Later, after Milo sleeps and dishes are done, Lorien finds Zara on the balcony overlooking city lights sparkling like fallen stars. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't knocked on our door?" he asks. "Sometimes. But some broken pieces are supposed to find each other to create something, stronger than either could be alone." They stand in comfortable silence. Two people who've learned healing doesn't mean forgetting the past, but choosing to build a different future. "Thank you," Lorien says quietly. "For what?" "For showing me what I was missing. For teaching me success isn't what you build, but who you choose to love. For giving us a chance to be real family." 6 months later, bright Saturday morning in April when Central Park explodes with spring colors, they're back with Sunshine House children. When someone asks Milo about his family, he doesn't hesitate. "That's my dad," he says, pointing to Lorien, pushing Sarah on swings while making ridiculous sound effects. "And that's Zara. She's everything we needed." "Are they your family?" Tommy asks, the same question that started everything. "Yeah," Milo grins, watching his father abandon dignity to chase giggling children. "They're my family, my real family, and you guys are too. We're all family." Surrounded by laughter of children who've learned love multiplies when shared, that families can be built from choice as much as blood. They understand something no money could buy. The best things aren't purchased. They're chosen, built, shared, created one conversation at a time, one moment of presence, one act of love. Sometimes a single question from a lonely child changes everything. Are they my brothers and sisters? The answer is always yes. Family isn't just blood or names or addresses. It's who chooses to share your life, struggles, joys, and hope for tomorrow. That's the only inheritance that matters, not money or property, but knowledge you were loved, mattered, were worth someone's time and presence. If this story touched your heart and reminded you that love is the only wealth that truly matters, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more heartwarming stories that heal the soul. Your support helps us share these important messages with families who need to hear them.